Hi guys, my name's Jeremy and I'm an American who's been teaching in China for over 10 years now. So I figured I'd offer you guys some good advice if you're ever thinking of coming here. I've done everything from little kids all the way up to university, and I've done like primary school, training schools, and tons of other things. I pretty much did everything except for international schools in high school. So in this video, I'll try to give you some information like the basic requirements you'll need, what are the different schools you could teach at, the pros and cons of each, what is the best locations to teach, what I'd recommend, is China the best option, and is even teaching the best option, or are there some other alternatives? So the first thing you have to know is, can you even come into China? Because as of 2022, it's not super easy to get into China. So right now, I think it's not the best time, but maybe if you see this video in 2023, things will get better, and I'm sure by 2024, it'll be back to normal, hopefully. But with that being said, I mean, there definitely are still people coming in to teach and do different jobs in China. It's just more difficult. And since it's more difficult for the employers, they need more paperwork and more money, basically. And so they could still get people, but it's usually just like your international schools or your big schools that are able to like pay, for the flight and do all the arrangements and quarantine and that kind of thing. But hopefully by, I don't know, 2023 or 2024, it'll open up and there's going to be a ton of jobs. There's already a huge amount of jobs, and because there's such a large shortage, the pay salaries are already, have gone up like 30% or whatever, or maybe even doubled in some cases. So it could be a great option. So as far as requirements go, I'll pull up a job ad right here, and you could see basically everything you'd need for a kindergarten job, for an example. And you can see number one, a bachelor's degree. So that's pretty much the basic thing you're gonna need with almost any job. You used to not even need a degree in some cases back in the day, but things are more strict now. So I would definitely at least have a bachelor degree if you're coming into China. Although you will still probably be able to find some under the table kind of jobs. You should have at least a BA. Okay, and so you see here, number two says native speaker. So you should usually be from a native English speaking country, right? And so that would be obviously like the States, Canada, New Zealand, Australia, UK, South Africa, Ireland, and a couple other places. So now that's not super important either. You can find some jobs. Like I know quite a few people from like Eastern Europe or other countries that do teach. So you still can try to find some jobs, but generally speaking, they want a native speaker. So number three, it says non-criminal record. So you'll have to go to the police station, like in your hometown or wherever, and get some non-criminal background check, and then send that to like a Chinese embassy or consulate, and they have to stamp that. There's some agencies that could help you do this because it is a little bit of a hassle, but you'll definitely have to do that if you want to get the work permit and the visa and everything before you come. And then they usually say you should have your like TESL or TEFL, like teaching English as a foreign language certificate. Now, I actually don't have one. I've been teaching for years and I've never had that. So, I had just got in a long time ago and the job didn't need it. And so my experience helped me get the jobs. But if you have no experience, it's probably not a bad idea to get one of those certificates. They only take a few weeks to finish, and they're not too expensive. So you could look at doing that, and that could help you a little bit in the long run. And so it can also help you learn stuff like, grammar, lesson planning, some teaching styles, and like different things like that. So it could be helpful. And then like this job says they'd like some experience. I mean, I think a lot of people are pretty desperate, so I don't think that'll always matter. Now, like universities would like to see teachers have about 3 years experience, but generally speaking, it's not a must. And then at the bottom there, you can see the salary. It's about 22 to 25,000 renminbi. So that's about 3,000 to 3,500 US dollars. Probably goes up to about 4,000 for kindergarten jobs. So one of the first jobs a lot of people get into are working for like training schools. And that's kind of what I do now. It's just a small training school for kids. Now note that last year in the summer of 2021, China made huge regulation changes to the education industry where basically they don't want kids to take so many classes in general, whether English or other subjects. So they can't take a bunch of classes on the weekend, and they only could take like a certain amount on the like weekdays in the evenings and stuff like that. So that gutted out about 90% of the training schools in China, and online teaching too. So that doesn't mean it's over. Like there's some schools that have found some workarounds, like maybe on the weekend they're teaching students a subject like it could be outdoors and it's in English, but it's just like an outdoor program or something like that. And so they're trying to work around this kind of stuff, but it did cut out a lot of jobs. Now, don't worry, there still are a lot of jobs at training schools, and adults can also go. So there's still plenty of adults. And so if you don't like kids and you want to teach adults anyway, there's still plenty of jobs in that area. So some of the good things about training schools is that, like, you usually get a pretty wide variety at a lot of these big training schools. You'll have everything from, older people who want to learn English. They could be like 40, 50, 60 years old, down to little kids. The class size could be, you could do one-on-one or small groups of 2 or 3 people up to, who knows, 10, and all different ages and all different English levels. So this is kind of a good way to actually break into the English industry, because you get a big variety and you have to get used to everything. A young kid with, maybe great English with a person who's 50 and almost no English. So you've got to try to maneuver this, which it's a little bit more of a challenge, but it can make you more well-rounded. I think the biggest minuses, the biggest cons would be that you work usually on the weekends, in the evenings. So if you like going out on Friday and Saturday night, you can be a little hungover on the weekends. So yeah, you lose the weekends. I know, like, for instance, I do tours here in Chengdu besides teaching, and tons of people want to come out on my trips, but about a third or half of them can't join on the weekends. So occasionally I try to do weekday tours, but you're going to miss out on some of the weekend things. And yeah, and most evenings you're going to work too. And also the minuses for that, I mean, it depends on any school, but like some of those schools can overwork people, and some people have horror stories because they come to China, it's the first job they found, and they didn't get paid on time, or they give you an apartment, the apartment sucks, or like my friend, they gave him like an office, was basically just a little chair in a corner with a small desk. So some of these schools, don't treat people always the best, but it depends. I personally think work for the smaller schools that aren't that famous. The really big corporations might pay a little bit more money and have some other benefits and stuff like that. But the small training schools, like for instance, I work for a small one, they only have like 30, 40 different students at that school and a few teachers, and I get treated well, and I do my own thing, and it's pretty good. So that varies on school to school, and just like any job, right? It depends on the institution or the job you work for, like the company, your boss, and like curriculum and other things. So that'll just depend. If you could try to find out, like get in contact with people who work at some of these companies or schools, you might maybe get a lowdown. But if there's not good ratings, people don't say good things about it, be careful. I've had a couple schools that I worked for that weren't really that great, but generally speaking, I've been pretty lucky. So the next thing is like, primary and secondary education. I've only done some part-time things there, and it's okay, but you do have big classes. They're usually like 35 kids in a class, so it's a big difference. Like, for instance, I don't mind doing small classes of kids of different ages, like if I have like 3 or 4 kids, or even up to like 10 kids. But when you get to 35 kids, it could be pretty noisy in there. So that might be something you have to consider. Maybe try out some part-time jobs until you sign up to do it full-time. I don't see too many advertisements for those kinds of jobs. So I'm not sure if it's like 8 to 5, or if you do, like when I've gone, I only did 2 or 3 classes in a day, so I wasn't there all day long, but it'll depend on the job. The only good thing there is that some of these jobs, especially if you get up to the like more secondary education, you might be able to teach like science or other subjects in English. And so if you don't want to teach English and you want to do something of your like background, let's say your science or history or math, you might be able to find some jobs in that area. Yeah, and just the cons could be, just big classrooms. I know when I did some like middle school kids, it was really tough to like get everyone to like pay attention and quiet down. So I personally didn't like it too much, but it might be okay for you. And also, it depends on the school, but I didn't really have like any curriculum, so I had to like make up everything, which is good and bad. When you make your own curriculum, it can take a long time, but at least you know what you're teaching and you like it. Where if someone gives you some books and things, maybe it doesn't work that well, or maybe you don't like the material. So it could be time consuming to do all your own lessons, but it could pay off in some ways. So kindergarten jobs are pretty big. I think that might be most of the job ads I see, or quite a lot, are for kindergarten. And those do pay quite a bit. Like I mentioned at the beginning of the video, I think that's usually $3,000 or $4,000. So that's one of the higher paid jobs, but that's like 8 to 5. So that's a lot of hours to be around kids screaming all day. You might want earplugs, but I don't know. It could be a good job. Like, if you've got to pay off student loans or something like that, or you just want to save a bunch of money, it could be a pretty good job. Some of these schools have their own curriculum. I imagine quite a lot of them actually. So you might not have to plan everything, and you're probably not working all day. Like, you probably work a class and maybe you've got off a half hour and then you do another class, this kind of thing. The classes are probably going to be, maybe you don't have 35 students, but they're probably going to be kind of in the medium range where you've got maybe 15 to 20. So it might be pretty decent sized classes. It's probably not going to be like 3 or 4 kids or anything like that. So that would also be a little bit tough. But the pay is decent, and at least you don't have to work weekends. And I guess for vacation time, you probably don't get a ton of vacation time. Definitely 2 or 3 weeks for Chinese New Year and maybe a month off in the summer, but I'm not sure. It'll depend on the school. And then some of those might give you housing or just give you extra pay. So there's quite a decent amount of university jobs. This is the job I've done the most in China. I personally like it the most, and I think it's, generally speaking, the best, because you have a ton of time off. You've got like a month in January or around Chinese New Year in between semesters, and then you've got about 2 months off in the summer. So, and then of course you have weekends off. And a lot of these schools, actually, it depends. Some of them have heavier schedules, but a lot of those jobs are only like 2 or 3 days a week. So you have like almost too much free time. And I mean, that's good in the way that like you have free time to travel or study Chinese, for instance, or you can work some other jobs to make money, but they don't pay a ton of money, generally speaking. So this could be a lot of the time the lowest paying job with the most free time. So it just depends what you want to do. Like, do you want to pay off a bunch of loans or save a bunch of money, or do you want to work at a university and have more free time to travel or like study Chinese? Because if you're going to study Chinese, to be honest, like, you're not going to do it like a couple hours a week. You really are going to need to do like, geez, I'd say like, almost a full-time thing. So you got to look at 20, 30, 40 hours a week, I'd recommend. A lot of us, including myself, have only done, a few hours a week, and it's just never going to be enough. You're never going to get above intermediate if you do it like that. However, the salaries have gone up quite a bit because there's such a big shortage now. When I first got here, like almost 10 years ago, it was only about $1,000 a month. And now they're looking like at least $2,000 or $2,500. And some of the private universities give you more classes, so you work 4 or 5 days a week and get maybe closer to like $3,000 or $4,000 a month. And then, of course, if you have a PhD, that depends. Generally, that helps you because you won't just teach English. You could probably teach a more specialized subject. But the public schools usually don't pay too much more, maybe only 1,000 renminbi more or so. But I do know at some private schools, like when I've worked near Hong Kong and Zhuhai, they made like $5,000, $6,000 a month or something like that. And they were only teaching like 5 classes a week or something. So that could be a real sweet deal if you get a PhD. And sometimes even a master's will get you some good salaries and good jobs. So if you're going to teach English at a university, you're usually going to teach something called college English. And you usually only see the students like once a week or once every 2 weeks. And you see all different kinds of majors, and for like an hour and a half, let's say. And it's just general English stuff. Like, it could be just about like, whatever, food, hobbies, and basic things. And so it's really not enough time to really improve a lot of their English or get to know them very well, because you're only going to see them like 8 times in a semester. So it's kind of like a factory. Like, you see a bunch of different majors only a little bit, just so they see a foreign face and get some advice on, improving English. But they're definitely going to have to do a lot more on their own, because obviously 1 class every 2 weeks is not enough. Now, occasionally you'll get some more specialized courses, like you might get some English majors and see them a couple times a week. Or with some schools, you could teach electives, which is nice, because college English gets pretty boring. So I've done like critical thinking, academic English, introduction to English-speaking countries, study skills, and several other things. So you could see, with the school, if there's some other opportunities to branch out from English to do something you like more, or something you have a background in. So overall, I think the university is good, but the cons would be that there's not amazing pay. The other big con is that, like, when you teach kids in a training school, or even at like primary school or high school or something, you generally don't have kids on their phones. But college students, of course, have phones in the classroom and computers. So that could be kind of annoying because you do have to like push that like you need to get off your phones, right? And so there's different ways you can manage that aspect, but I find that's like a little annoying because it's definitely something you have to think about, that you have to do classroom management for this, because otherwise like the students are obviously going to sit on their phones. So you got to lay the hammer down some way or another, or take their phones away, or whatever you have to do. The other big con is that a lot of the time these universities are well outside the center of a city. You know, when I worked at Chongqing University, I was about 40 minutes away from downtown, and when I worked in Zhuhai, I was about 25, 30 minutes north of town. So not only are you far from town, but they usually give you the housing. So you could live downtown, but you'd have a huge commute. Or you can live on campus, which is convenient because your classes are probably only 10 minutes away, but you live at work and you live with all your colleagues and stuff, which could be great. I mean, I've generally had awesome colleagues, but you know, sometimes you want to kind of get away from your students and your colleagues, you know, because you know, it kind of becomes a little incestuous, as one of my friends said, and you kind of just, you live with the same people, then you go out with the same people to the same places, and then you share your taxis back and forth, and so you kind of end up in a little bit of a bubble. And so it's good to kind of break out and meet some other people who live downtown, or different people, instead of just sticking around campus or the like towns that are nearby, because there's always like some bars and places you can hang out nearby. But if you want a little bit more diversity, you're going to have to head downtown. So don't get too stuck in a rut. So that's the biggest minus. Like I would consider, even if you teach at a university and you want to pay you know, $300 or $400 extra a month to live downtown, it might be worth it. So as I mentioned, to know if it's a good job or not, it's going to depend on a few factors. Is it a good school or bad school? How's your boss? You know, how are the students? So if you don't work for a good school and you don't have a good boss and the students aren't good, it's going to be a hell of a time. So, you know, try to get something with a little bit of a decent reputation. And you can't always know if your boss is great, but generally they're pretty hands-off, to be honest. Usually they let you do your own thing for the most part. So that could be tough for some people, because some people do want a lot of guidance and they don't give you too much for most of the jobs I've had. But if you don't want someone breathing down your neck or micromanaged, it could be good, because they're just going to generally let you go. And so then if you've got some decent students, it's going to be pretty easy. If you don't have good students and they have zero English ability, it's going to be tough, and you're going to have to figure out ways to be able to navigate this, basically. And you don't really need to teach all class and talk all class. Have them prepare things ahead of time and do a lot of their own talking and things. You shouldn't be sitting there lecturing it's not a lecture, you know. They should be doing activities and things on their own for at least half, if not 2/3 of the class. So don't think you got to sit there and do a lecture. You give them some guidance, teach them a bit, and then have them go into groups and figure out different things, or do debates or whatever you have. But you'll have to figure that aspect out. And then, of course, you'll have to make your own PPTs or whichever style of teaching you have. So as far as looking for work, I mean, you could look online. You could just look in Google, like teaching in China, you know, jobs teaching in China. And Google Jobs has a list of tons of things. I know back in the day, Dave's ESL was pretty popular. And I'm sure there's tons of Facebook groups and things like that. Now, of course, it would be better just to come to China and then find a job or somewhere you like to live. But you have to be in your home country to get the jobs. So it's going to be important for you to research as much as you can about the job. You know, is it a good institution? The other huge thing is location. You know, a lot of people don't even look up where they're going. They just end up in some small town in China in the middle of nowhere, and there's no foreigners, there's no Western food, there's nothing to do. It's like you know, an industrial town somewhere in the middle of nowhere. So you don't want to end up in the middle of nowhere in this kind of situation. Try to pick a cool city, you know, like for instance, I live in Chengdu. It's a you know, pretty international city. It's got great access to the mountains. I do tours out here all the time. And so there's tons to do, and tons of Western restaurants, and several hundred foreigners, and tons of local Chinese people who are cool, and you know, know English and everything like that. So make sure you don't live in the middle of nowhere. Check where you're actually going. Make sure if they're going to give you accommodation, maybe see some photos. Make sure you're not living in a, you know, total shithole or anything like that. You know, if you could like for instance, if you have a job in Chengdu, you could maybe find a Facebook group that's in Chengdu, and you can maybe send a message in the group, hi, I'm going to work for this school. You know, what is the reputation, or does anyone know about it? How is it? And you could probably get some information that way. Another school that a lot of people work at are the international schools. So those are the regular like 8 to 5 jobs, teaching international kids. And actually, it ends up being quite a lot of Chinese kids who actually have passports from like either Western countries, or they actually just bought like passports from like some small like Caribbean or islands in the Pacific, like just random things. So they're technically international, and those jobs are pretty good. They pay a lot. You'll probably make at least $3, $4, $5,000 a month. But yeah, those are pretty intense jobs as far as like you're gonna have a lot more meetings. The parents are gonna be much more involved, and you'll probably have to make quite a bit of your curriculum. You might have to do some coaching after classes end. So those are good paying jobs, and it could be great, but it's definitely gonna be very time consuming. At least you have some time off, either for Christmas or Chinese New Year, and probably in the summer. So you'll have some decent vacation time, but otherwise Monday through Friday, you're definitely gonna be really busy. And then of course the requirements for that is you're gonna definitely have to have a teaching license from the country you're from. So just being a native speaker or just having a bachelor's degree is not gonna be enough for almost any of these positions, from kindergarten all the way up to secondary education. So that's something you need to consider. If you do wanna consider teaching long-term, I actually was going to be a high school teacher, and I basically went through all the courses, but I didn't do the year of like student teaching basically, which is required for me to get the teaching license. So, but that would have opened a lot of doors for a lot more high paying jobs. So that's something you consider. If you want to teach long term, that could be a good idea for you. There's a lot of high paying international school jobs, not just in China, but many of these schools like Quality School International, for instance, QSI, for instance. They have, a school in Chengdu, and they have schools in like Italy and other places in Asia and maybe United States or South America, all over the world basically. So you might be able to work in one country and transfer to another country. And I think some of those offer a pension too. That could be really good, because obviously these teaching jobs, some of these jobs, if you work in China for like 20 years, you might be able to get a pension or something like that. But most people aren't going to live in China for 20 years unless maybe you're married. And even that, a lot of people don't want to live here that long necessarily. The other benefit for working at the international school is that your kids probably could go. Because if you pay your kids to go to a private school in China, it's going to be like 20 or 30,000 US dollars a year. So this is one of the reasons why a lot of people leave, because they don't want their kids to go to a public Chinese school. So that could be a big benefit for you too. So is China the best option? Well, I mean, I haven't taught in too many other places. I did teach in Taipei for a year, and that was pretty good. But Taipei is a lot of training schools for kids. And so you're working in the evening or weekends, and they don't pay that much, like $20 to $30 an hour. They haven't really raised wages in like 20, 30 years. So I did try to apply to some universities there, and they usually wanted a master's in linguistics or English or something. I've got a master's, but it's more like Chinese studies, so I couldn't get those jobs. And then, of course, Korea and Japan pay pretty well, like China, and those could be good jobs. And I've met people who have taught in both. I do think a lot of people do like China a bit more. I think maybe it's because, there's a lot more opportunities for traveling and stuff like that. And maybe Chinese are a little bit warmer and a little bit more interested in foreigners. Now, that's at least how it used to be. Quite lately with the pandemic, I will admit it hasn't been amazing. You can see a few of my videos. I talk about how tough it's been during the pandemic and how tough it is to get hotels and stuff like that. But I still think, if you're here for like 3, 4, 5 years and you want to save money and you want to do a lot of traveling to some amazing places, like I said, I'm in Chengdu. It's only a couple hours from Eastern Tibetan areas, because all of Western Sichuan's a Tibetan area, basically. And Yunnan's nearby, which is amazing, and Qinghai, and even Central. I mean, everywhere in China's got a lot of pretty areas. So, and then also there's tons and tons and tons of jobs. I mean, just because there's a huge population and there's a huge shortage. So even if you don't like the town you're in or the job you've got, you could, move over and transfer relatively easy to other positions in other cities. So I still think it's a good place to try out for sure. Now, Southeast Asia is another popular option, especially lately. Because of the pandemic and the way foreigners have been treated in China lately, a lot of people are going to Vietnam and Thailand and other places. So those could be great places, but the problem is that if there's like thousands of teachers going down there, those markets might get flooded, and you're probably not going to find as many good jobs, at least is my guess in 2022 and 2023. I could be wrong, but I know like a lot of people right now, they don't want to go back to, the UK or America or Canada because it's so expensive right now. And so a lot of people are heading down to Vietnam and Thailand. So there could be a shortage of jobs and they're probably not going to pay as well. I think maybe only Vietnam pays decent. I don't think you're going to get much in like somewhere like Laos or Cambodia or Malaysia or Indonesia or most of anywhere else. But you could look into it still. And then of course there's other jobs in like the Middle East, like Qatar or some of the wealthier areas there, like Saudi Arabia and stuff. And they do pay quite a bit. I haven't taught there, but I've had friends do that, and they were able to make a lot of money. And I think it'd be cool. It'd be interesting. As foreigners, if like you like to party and stuff, you have to kind of organize that kind of stuff a little bit on your own, because of course alcohol and stuff like that in some of those countries is limited. So you can still do it, but you just do house parties and things. You kind of live in a compound, so you're in a little bit of a bubble in some of those countries, not all. But so that's something you could look at. I know I've had friends teaching like Kurdistan, Iraq, and some other places. And so you could look and see some of those jobs pay okay, some of them aren't as good, but that could be an interesting option. I don't think in Europe you'd get paid too much, or like, Latin America or Africa or something like that. So yeah, East Asia and the Middle East are, I think, some of the highest paying options. I don't know of too many other places where you'd get high paying jobs. And then of course you could teach online. But the problem is, as I mentioned, when China cracked down on the training schools, they also closed a lot of those online teaching platforms. So a lot of those companies have either closed or stopped taking new teachers because they didn't need to hire as many. And so there are some jobs online teaching, but I've even applied and I've got experience and I couldn't really get any jobs except for maybe one. So you could look for that option. That could be a good job to work remotely if you don't even want to be in China and you want to live somewhere else, but you still want to teach kids from like China or other countries. You can look into some of those options. So then the last thing is teaching a good job. This is to each their own. I think teaching's okay. I don't think anyone is, I can't say anyone, but I don't think anyone's super into it long term. Like, at the beginning, you're in it, whether you're teaching English or even in the States and stuff like that, you want to make a difference and change and this kind of thing. And really, it's just like when you went to school. Students are there because they have to do it, for the most part, right? They want the degree or they have to be in school. So you're, like if I do a tour, for instance, or if I sell a pizza, or like you go to a movie theater or buy a phone, it's because you definitely wanted it. You wanted to go on that tour, you wanted to have that pizza, and if it's good, you enjoy it, that kind of thing. Like people don't really want to be in school that much. So you're kind of giving someone something they don't, it's like kind of feeding little kids vegetables or something they don't want. You have to find a way of making it interesting so they like it. And so that kind of thing can be good for some people if you're kind of a nurturing person. And I have that to an extent, and I could be very strict too. And so it's kind of hard to balance like trying to be nice and caring, and at the same time you need to be strict and tell them not to be on their phone or to be on time and this kind of thing. And so anyway, after a few years, once you learn how to teach and be good at it, it's not really like you have a big stepping stone, like a ladder, like other careers. Like, in many other careers, you can move up the ladder to be like a CEO, or you can get better at sales and make more money or something like that. And so there's not like a ton of like different departments or places you might move and move up the chain, so to speak. So I think for a lot of teachers, especially like with English, it's cool for like 3 to 5 years, and a lot of people might move on to other things. But if you do like teaching, it could be a great career, especially, if you open up your own school, you can make quite a lot of money, obviously. Or if you go on to higher education and get a master's or a PhD, it can open up some new doors, so you could just look into that. Although that stuff can be competitive in some ways, but you can't always find some doors that can open for that. So that's up to you. I think I would recommend, to look at other options, like while you're teaching. For instance, if you're working at a university, you've got a lot of free time, you could learn Chinese, maybe learn coding, or maybe learn some other remote jobs. Because as I mentioned, teaching jobs that pay well are mostly in East Asia and like the Middle East. So maybe you want to live in Mexico or Serbia or Africa or whatever. And, the cost of living there might be really cheap, but you can't get paid to teach English. But if you know how to do coding, or you found a good job teaching online or some other skills, you can have a lot more opportunities. So don't box yourself in with teaching English for too long. I think that's one of my problems. Now I'm trying to break out of teaching, actually, to be honest. Maybe do coding or some other things, or just even continue with my tours, and that could be a good option. And so anyway, I hope this information was helpful for you guys if you're considering teaching. And my channel, by the way, is mostly adventure stuff. I've lived not just in China, but I've ridden a bicycle around the world. I've hiked the Appalachian Trail, and I've been a commercial fisherman in Alaska, and I've got a lot of other interesting things on my channel. And I also have some pretty cool stories over the years of some of the insane things that have happened. So it takes a lot of time to make these videos. So anyway, like and subscribe, and I'll see you next time. Cheers.